Hi, this is Mrs. Molcha with a math video lesson for Math 8, Week 8, Monday, May 18th. This is about perfect square and cube roots and estimating imperfect roots. First, let's talk about what a perfect square is. A perfect square has two identical factors. Since 5 times 5, or 5 squared, equals 25, that means 25 is a perfect square. A square root is one of the identical factors. So the square root of 25 is 5. You see the relationship here. 5 squared equals 25. Square root of 25 equals 5. A perfect cube has 3 identical factors. So 5 times 5 times 5, or 5 cubed, is 125. A cube root is one of the identical factors. So the cube root of 125 is 5. So notice, 5 cubed is 125. Cube root of 125 equals 5. A root is also called a radical, and this is known as the radical sign. The index shows what kind of radical you're looking for. And that's the number that's right here, the small number right here up high outside the radical sign. So this little 3 means that we're looking for the cube root or third root. We're looking for the number that multiplied by itself 3 times gives you 64. The cube root of 64 is 4 because 4 times 4 times 4, or 4 cubed, equals 64. If there is no visible index, it's implied to be a square root. So square root of 64, or just root 64, equals the square root of 64, which is 8, because 8 times 8 equals 64. So this 2 here in the index is often invisible because it is implied. Now when you're doing decimal roots, you have to say, are there an even number of decimal places for decimal square roots, and do the digits form a perfect square? So the square root of 0.25 equals 0.5 because 0.5 times 0.5, or 0.5 squared, equals 0.25. The square root of 0.16 is equal to 0.4. because 0.4 squared, or 0.4 times 0.4, equals 0.16. The square root of 0.0016 is equal to 0.04 because 0.04 squared, or 0.04 times 0.04, equals 0.0016. Next example, the cube root of 0.008. That is 0.2. This is because 0.2 cubed, or multiplied by itself 3 times, 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2, equals 0.008. Now we're going to look at the cube root of negative 0.000064. Now we can't find the square root of a negative number, but we can find the cube root of a negative number. And in this case, the cube root is equal to negative 0.04 because negative 0.04 cubed is equal to negative 0.000064. And this is because a negative times a negative is a positive, but then when you multiply it by another negative, it becomes negative again. So the cube root of a negative number is going to be negative. Now we're talking about estimating imperfect roots. To estimate a root that is not perfect, find the two perfect roots that it is in between and place it in between them. So the square root of 6, well, that is in between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. I chose 4 and 9 because those are the perfect squares right below and above 9. Below and above 6 are 4 and 9. So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 6 is going to be in between 2 and 3. So it's going to be 2 point something. And in fact, it's close to 2.3 or 2.4. But you definitely know it's going to be between 2 and 3. Next example, we're going to estimate the square root of 30. So we have the square root of 30. Now we have to think of the perfect square that is smaller than 30, and that is 25. And a perfect square larger than 30, which is 36. Now the square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 36 is 6. So the square root of 30 is going to be in between 5 and 6. It's going to be 5 point something. And in fact, it is approximately 5.4. Now, let's think about this. 2 squared, or 2 times 2, is 4. Now, negative 2 squared, or negative 2 times negative 2, is also 4, because negative times negative is positive. Negative 4's square root could be 2 or negative 2. When a variable is squared, it has 2 possible roots, a positive one and a negative one. If x squared equals 4, then x is either 2 or negative 2. We write this as x is positive or negative 2. Now we're going to find x if x squared is 9. So to solve this, we have to get x by itself. We have to get rid of the square root. The square. So we take the square root of both sides, which we have to do the same thing on both sides. And on the left, we have x, because the square and square root cancel out, equals, and the square root of 9 could either be 3 or negative 3, so we say positive or negative 3. X is equal to positive or negative 3. This is because x is equal to the positive or negative square root of 9. Generally, when you're asked to find the square root with the radical, just give the positive root, known as the principal root. So if we're going to find the square root of 25, that is 5. Now if we have the negative square root of 36. Here, you'll notice the negative sign is outside of the square root. That means it's basically saying negative 1 times the square root of 36, which is negative 1 times 6, which is negative 6. Now we have plus or minus square root of 81. That means we're looking for the positive and negative square root, which is positive or negative 9. Now to find roots of fractions. The idea is that the square root of a over b is equal to the square root of a over the square root of b. So for example, if we want to find the square root of 1/4, we say that is equal to the square root of 1 over the square root of 4. And that is equal to 1 over 2. Our next example is the square root of 9 over 25. Try to solve this one on your own. Hopefully you said the answer is the square root of 9 over the square root of 25, which is equal to 3 over 5.